I paid for a private investigator on the dark web to track my missing brother. Now, I'm the one who's gone. I didn't believe it at first. The stories about people disappearing without a trace. You hear things? Urban legends, horror tales shared around a campfire or online, but they're just that, right? Stories. At least, that's what I thought until my brother went missing. It's been months. 6 months to be exact since Jared vanished without a word. No note, no calls, nothing. He was the kind of guy who'd text me just to send a stupid meme or let me know what he had for lunch. He wasn't the type to just disappear. I did all the usual things when he first went missing. Called his friends, checked his social media, filed a police report. The cops were useless though. They told me he was probably off somewhere, living life on his own terms, that sometimes people just leave. But I knew Jared. He wouldn't have left without telling me. I tried to move on, pretended like everything was fine, like Jared was just going to walk back through the door one day with that goofy grin on his face, saying, "You miss me?" But as time dragged on, that hope faded. Something happened to him. I could feel it. I wasn't sure what to do next until a random conversation with one of Jared's old friends put me on a dark path. We were sitting in this dingy bar, and I was venting about the police not doing anything. That's when his friend, Mark, leaned in and said, "There are other ways to find people, if you're desperate enough." He didn't say much more than that, just mentioned some underground resources and private investigators who don't ask questions. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later that night, I found myself looking up everything I could about these other ways. That's when I stumbled across the dark web. Now I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would anyone go on the dark web? Trust me, I wasn't keen on it either. I'd heard all the stories, illegal activities, hackers, hitmen, but desperation does things to people. I was running out of options, and the dark web felt like the last place I hadn't looked. Maybe, just maybe, I could find someone who could help me. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There was a forum hidden away beneath layers of anonymity, filled with posts about missing persons and private investigations. One name kept popping up in the threads: Watcher, PI. No one knew exactly who or what Watcher, PI was. Some said it was a group of investigators, others claimed it was just one guy. But the stories were consistent. Watcher, PI found people. No questions asked, no details spared. And I needed Jared found. Without thinking too much about it, I clicked on the link provided in one of the posts and followed the instructions. It led me to a page, stripped down, and eerie in its simplicity. There was just a single message. Need someone found? Pay in cryptocurrency. We'll find them. No refunds. It was shady as hell, but I didn't care. I transferred the money, a ridiculous amount of it, and typed in my request. Find my brother, Jared. He's been missing for 6 months. No one can help me. I hit send, expecting a confirmation of some sort of acknowledgement. Instead, the screen went blank, and I was left staring at my reflection in the darkened monitor, feeling like an idiot. I closed the laptop, sinking into my chair with a deep sense of regret. What had I just done? Days passed with nothing. No emails, no messages, no signs that anyone had even seen my request. I was starting to accept that I had been scammed when something strange happened. I woke up one morning to a notification on my phone. It wasn't a text or email, it was a video. It didn't have a sender, just a cryptic link. I almost ignored it, thinking it was spam or something worse. But curiosity got the best of me. I clicked the link and the video opened up. It was grainy, low quality, like something from an old VHS tape. At first it was just static, but then the image cleared and I saw a room, dark, empty, and unfamiliar. The camera was pointed at the floor, but I could hear something in the background. Breathing, slow and heavy, like someone was just out of frame, watching. My heart started racing as the camera slowly panned up, revealing a man tied to a chair in the center of the room. His head was slumped forward, his hair covering his face, but I recognized him immediately. It was Jared. I couldn't breathe. My brother, my missing brother, was right there, tied to a chair in some dark room, alive, but barely. I leaned in closer, my eyes glued to the screen, as a voice, cold, emotionless, spoke from somewhere off camera. "You wanted him found. Now he's yours to find." The video cut off, the screen going black. My hands were shaking, my mind reeling. What the hell had I gotten myself into? Jared was alive, but he wasn't safe, and now I was the one who had to find him. I stared at the black screen for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Jared was alive. He was alive, but he wasn't safe. Whoever had him, whoever sent that video, wasn't just some random kidnapper. This felt bigger, darker, like I'd stumbled into something way over my head. The video replayed in my mind on a loop, the image of Jared slumped in that chair, his head hanging like he'd been through hell. I needed to act fast, but where the hell would I even start? The video gave me nothing, no landmarks, no clues, nothing I could use to track him down. And that voice, the way it spoke, so cold, so matter of fact. Now, he's yours to find. Like this was all some kind of twisted game. I couldn't call the police. They hadn't helped before, and I knew they'd write me off as paranoid or crazy. Especially if I mentioned the dark web. I was on my own. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jared's face, pale and gaunt, as if life had been slowly drained out of him. I could almost hear that voice again, whispering in the dark, "Yours to find." The next morning, I decided to try something, anything, that could give me more answers. I went back online, pulling up the same dark web forum where I'd found Watcher PI. If there was one thing I knew about these kinds of places, it was that people talked. Maybe someone had used Watcher PI before, or maybe there were others who'd received these cryptic messages. I scrolled through thread after thread, most of them dead ends. But after what felt like hours, I found something, a post buried deep within the forum, titled, "Has anyone else received videos?" My heart skipped a beat. The post was from someone claiming they had hired Watcher PI to find a missing person, just like I had. And days later, they too had received a video. The details were eerily similar to my own experience. A missing sibling, a mysterious video, a vague, threatening message. But what chilled me the most was what the original poster had written at the end of the thread. I tried following the trail. It led me to places I wish I hadn't gone. If you're reading this, you still have a chance to back out. Don't look for them. Once you start, you can't stop. You become the target. I felt a lump in my throat. The post was months old, and the original poster hadn't replied to any of the follow-up questions. They had just disappeared. But I wasn't going to stop. Jared was my brother, and if he was alive, I was going to find him, no matter what it took. I clicked back to the video link from the night before. I hadn't noticed it at first, but there was something off about the static in the opening frames. It flickered in a pattern, almost like a code. Grabbing my phone, I played the video again, pausing at the moment where the static flickered in that strange way. There it was, hidden in plain sight. It wasn't just random interference, it was numbers, an address. My heart pounded as I realized what it meant. Whoever sent this video wanted me to find Jared. They were leading me somewhere, giving me the next breadcrumb in this sick game. The address was local, too local. It was an old industrial park just on the outskirts of the city, a place that had been abandoned for years. No one went there, not since the factories closed down. I felt sick just thinking about it. But if that's where Jared was, I had to go. It was late afternoon when I finally pulled up to the industrial park. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the crumbling buildings. The place looked like it had been forgotten by time. Rusted fences, broken windows, overgrown weeds. It gave off the kind of vibe where you wouldn't want to be caught alone after dark. Unfortunately for me, I was. I parked the car a little ways off, not wanting to draw attention to myself, and walked the rest of the way. The address from the video led me to an old warehouse, the doors chained shut, but with a gap just big enough for me to slip through. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the dark interior beyond the gap. Every instinct was telling me to turn around, that this was a trap, but I couldn't leave without knowing what was inside. Taking a deep breath, I squeezed through the opening. The air inside was cold, stale, like it hadn't been touched in years. My footsteps echoed through the empty space as I made my way deeper into the warehouse. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I knew I couldn't leave until I found something, anything, that could lead me to Jared. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the room, near a pile of broken pallets and rusted metal, was a chair. The same chair from the video. The ropes were still tied around the arms, frayed and worn, like someone had been bound there recently. I rushed toward it, my heart racing. Jared had been here, but now the chair was empty. I spun around, searching for any clue, any sign of where they had taken him next. My eyes landed on something half buried under the debris. It was small, metallic, and familiar. It was Jared's wallet. I picked it up, my hands shaking. There was no cash inside, no credit cards, just a small, folded piece of paper. I pulled it out and unfolded it, my stomach twisting as I read the single word written in thick black ink. Run. Before I could even process the message, I heard it. The sound of heavy footsteps behind me. I wasn't alone. The sound of footsteps behind me was like a punch to the gut. I froze, heart pounding, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were locked in place, rooted to the cold concrete floor. I didn't want to look back. I didn't dare to look back. The footsteps were slow, methodical, getting closer with each second. Whoever, or whatever, was behind me wasn't in a hurry. They didn't need to be. They knew I was trapped. My breath came in short, shallow bursts, my mind racing. The wallet in my hand felt heavy, like it had taken on a new meaning. Jared had been here. He had been this close to freedom. But the warning, run, it wasn't for him, was it? It was for me. I couldn't wait any longer. Without thinking, I bolted toward the nearest exit, my feet pounding against the concrete as I pushed myself harder than I ever had in my life. The footsteps behind me quickened, matching my speed, and the echo of them bounced off the walls, making it impossible to tell how far behind they were. I rounded a corner, heading deeper into the maze of abandoned machinery and crates that filled the warehouse. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, the shadows growing longer, darker. Every step felt like I was getting further away from safety. And that's when I realized the truth. I wasn't just being chased, I was being herded. Whoever was following me wasn't trying to catch me outright. They were steering me, pushing me deeper into the labyrinth of the warehouse. Every turn I took led me further into the darkness, into areas where the light barely reached. and the air felt suffocating. I slowed for just a moment, hoping to catch my breath and think, but the footsteps didn't. They kept moving, relentless, closing in. I ducked behind a stack of old crates, my back pressed against the cold metal. My heart was racing so hard it hurt, and my lungs burned from the effort of running. I could hear the footsteps now, closer, slower, deliberate. Whoever was following me was just on the other side of the crates. I held my breath, trying to quiet the pounding in my chest. I could hear them, whoever they were, breathing. It was deep, rhythmic, almost mechanical. A cold sweat dripped down the back of my neck as I leaned against the crate, waiting for them to pass. If I could just stay hidden for a little longer, maybe, just maybe, I could find a way out. The footsteps stopped, right in front of the crates. My heart nearly stopped with them. I could feel the weight of whoever or whatever was standing there just inches away from me. The air felt thicker, colder, like the presence on the other side of the crates was wrong. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. I didn't move, barely breathed, waiting for the inevitable, waiting for them to reach around the crate and grab me. But then, in a soft, raspy whisper, I heard it. Come out. I felt my stomach drop. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was Jared's voice. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. It couldn't be. Jared was the one who needed saving. He was the one tied up, trapped. But that voice, it was unmistakable. It had the same tone, the same inflection, but there was something else beneath it. Something cold and hollow. I stayed perfectly still, my body trembling with confusion and fear. Was this some kind of trick? A recording? But how did they know exactly how Jared sounded? Come out, the voice repeated, more insistent this time. I need you. I wanted to believe it was him. I wanted to believe that somehow Jared had escaped and was here, looking for me. But something deep inside told me the truth. It wasn't Jared. Whatever was on the other side of that crate, it wasn't him. I held my breath again, willing myself to stay hidden, to wait for it to leave. But the longer I waited, the more the fear gnawed at me. I couldn't sit here forever. If I didn't move soon, it would find me. The footsteps started again, moving away this time, further down the aisle between the crates. The relief was brief though. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer. With my hands shaking, I edged out from behind the crates, keeping low, and peered down the row. The figure was further ahead now, their back to me, but I could only see glimpses of them in the dim light. Their body moved strangely, jerking, like it wasn't used to walking. My stomach twisted in knots. Now was my chance. If I could slip past them, I could make it back toward the entrance. I took a deep breath and made my move, sprinting silently in the opposite direction. My shoes barely made a sound on the cold floor as I retraced my steps, back toward the narrow gap I'd entered through. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to go faster, to get out. But as I neared the exit, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door, the same one I had slipped through just minutes earlier, was now completely sealed shut. The gap was gone, replaced by solid metal. Panic surged through me. I spun around, looking for another way out, but before I could take another step, I felt it, that presence. The air around me grew cold, suffocating. I turned, and there, standing in the middle of the room, was the figure. It wasn't Jared, but it wore his face. The thing's body was long and twisted, its limbs unnatural and bent at wrong angles. But its face? It was Jared's, distorted but unmistakable. Its eyes were empty, hollow pits, and yet they were locked on me with a kind of hunger I'd never seen before. I found him, The thing rasped in Jared's voice, a twisted grin spreading across its face. Now, I've found you. I couldn't move. The thing wearing my brother's face stood there, grinning with those hollow eyes. It wasn't Jared. It looked like him, but everything about it was wrong. The way it moved, the way its limbs bent, and that smile was something no human should be capable of. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My legs felt like they were glued to the floor. I could only stare at it, my mind racing, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. This thing, this imposter, was playing with me. I've found you, it rasped again, each word a slow, drawn-out hiss. It took a step forward, its movements jerky, like a marionette controlled by an unseen hand. Every step made a sickening crack, as if its bones were breaking and resetting with each motion. I stumbled backward, my heart slamming against my chest. My body finally reacted. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my brain struggled to keep up, trying to understand what I was running from. My brother, or whatever was left of him, wasn't here. This thing, it was wearing his skin like a mask. Without thinking, I turned and bolted down the dark hallway that stretched out from the warehouse floor. I didn't know where I was going. There was no plan, no exit I could see. But staying there meant death, or worse. The thing didn't follow immediately. I heard its footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing behind me as if it knew there was nowhere I could go that would matter. I ran faster, nearly tripping over the debris scattered across the floor. My lungs burned, and every breath felt like I was inhaling ice, but I couldn't stop. Not yet. I reached a door at the end of the hallway, throwing my weight against it, desperate to get out. It flew open, revealing another section of the warehouse, this one even more run down, if that was possible. Rusted machinery lined the walls, old conveyor belts and broken tools left to rot. But there, in the corner, I saw it, a set of stairs leading down to a basement level. I hesitated for only a second, but that was all the time the thing needed to close in. I could hear it now, faster, the footsteps no longer slow or deliberate, but erratic, hungry. It was coming for me. I sprinted for the stairs, practically throwing myself down them, my hands gripping the rusty railing to keep from tumbling headfirst into the darkness below. The sound of the thing's laughter, cold, hollow, echoed through the stairwell. It wasn't even trying to hide anymore. It knew I had nowhere to go. The basement was worse. The air was damp, heavy, and smelled of decay. The dim light from the flickering bulbs overhead barely illuminated the space, but I could make out enough. A labyrinth of pipes, old storage rooms, and hallways that seemed to stretch on forever. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My heart raced as I tore through the basement. Every corner I turned, revealing more darkness, more decay. But that thing, whatever it was getting closer. I could hear it, its twisted limbs scraping against the walls, its voice calling out to me. "You can't run from family," it said in that distorted version of Jared's voice. The words twisting in the air like poison. "I'm always with you." I ducked into one of the storage rooms, slamming the door behind me and pressing my back against it, gasping for breath. My hands shook as I fumbled for something to barricade the door, but the room was empty. Nothing but rusted shelves and old tools that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. I slid down to the floor, my chest heaving, trying to think. There had to be a way out. There had to be. I couldn't let this thing catch me. But as the seconds ticked by, the reality of the situation hit me. This thing wasn't just wearing Jared's face. It was Jared, or at least some twisted version of him. The realization sent a chill through my body. Whatever I had gotten involved in, whatever I had done by going on the dark web, it had changed him. It had turned him into that. The footsteps stopped outside the door. For a moment, there was only silence. I held my breath, waiting for the door to burst open, for the thing to come crashing in. But nothing happened. I leaned my head back against the cold, damp wall, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I was shaking, barely holding it together. The thought of Jared, of what Jared had become, was too much to process. And then the door creaked, slowly. Not like it was being forced, but like it was being invited in. The metal hinges squealed as the door opened just a crack, enough for me to see the hallway beyond. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. A shadow stretched into the room, long and distorted. I pressed my back harder against the wall, trying to make myself smaller, trying to disappear into the darkness. "Why are you hiding?" the voice asked, low and mocking. "You came all this way to find me." The door opened wider, and there it was, standing in the doorway. Its body bent and twisted, limbs too long for its frame, its skin pulling tight across its face in a grotesque imitation of my brother. "Come on," it whispered, that grin widening. "Don't you want to bring me home?" I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes. This thing wasn't Jared. But deep down I knew the truth. Jared wasn't coming home. He was gone. Whatever this was, it had taken him. I had led myself into a trap. I had walked right into this nightmare. And now it was my turn to be claimed. The figure stepped forward, its long fingers reaching for me, and I scrambled backward, my body screaming in terror. But there was nowhere left to run. The walls were closing in, the darkness consuming everything. And as the thing's cold hand touched my shoulder, I heard it whisper one last time in that voice that wasn't quite Jared's. "Now, you're mine too." The moment its hand touched my shoulder, everything inside me went cold. It wasn't just the chill of its skin, it was deeper than that, like it was reaching inside me, pulling at something I couldn't see. I tried to push it away, but my arms felt weak, useless, like I was trapped in a nightmare where my body wouldn't listen. The thing that wore Jared's face leaned closer, its breath hot and rancid against my skin. I could feel its smile widening, the pressure of its grip tightening as it whispered in my ear, "You're just like him, you know." I squeezed my eyes shut, praying this was all some twisted hallucination, that I'd wake up in my bed, soaked in sweat, with Jared's annoying texts lighting up my phone. But when I opened my eyes, I was still in that dark room, the creature looming over me, its distorted limbs casting grotesque shadows across the walls. My mind raced, trying to think of anything that could save me. But it was no use. Whatever this thing was, it had control now. I could feel it pulling me deeper into the darkness, dragging me toward whatever fate it had in store. And then, in the middle of my panic, I heard something. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Someone else was in the building. The thing stiffened, its head jerking toward the open door. For a second, the pressure on my shoulder eased, and I took the opportunity to scramble away, backing up against the far wall. My breath came in short gasps as I watched the thing Jared move toward the door, its body contorting, limbs bending unnaturally as it slithered out into the hallway. I didn't know who was out there. I didn't know if they were here to help me or if they were just another part of this nightmare. But I wasn't about to wait and find out. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling as I darted toward the door, peeking out just enough to see what was happening. The hallway was dimly lit. the flickering bulbs casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked concrete. And there, at the far end, was a figure. They were dressed in dark clothes, a hood pulled low over their face, making it impossible to tell who they were. But they weren't running. They were walking, calmly, like they knew exactly what they were doing. The creature that wore Jared's face was moving toward them, faster now, its twisted body jerking with each step. But the figure didn't seem scared. They didn't back away or even hesitate. Instead, they reached into their coat and pulled something out. A light, bright and blinding, flashed in the hallway. I winced, shielding my eyes as the thing screeched, a horrible guttural sound that echoed off the walls. The creature stumbled back, its body twitching violently, as if the light was burning it from the inside out. The figure stepped forward, holding the light steady, forcing the creature to retreat further into the darkness. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I bolted from the room, keeping low, my heart racing as I sprinted toward the nearest exit. The heavy footsteps of the figure echoed behind me, followed by the sickening sound of the creature's screeches fading into the distance. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not until I was out of that building, out of the nightmare. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face when I finally burst through the doors and into the open. I kept running, my legs burning, lungs screaming for air, until I was far enough away that the warehouse was just a shadow on the horizon. I collapsed by the side of the road, gasping for breath, my mind spinning. What the hell had just happened? Who was that person? And more importantly, what had that thing done to Jared? As I sat there, trying to collect myself, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up, expecting to see the figure from the warehouse, but instead it was a man, a stranger. His face was shadowed by the dim streetlight, but there was something unsettling about him. "You're lucky," he said, his voice low, calm. "Most people don't make it out once they get that far in." I stared at him, confused, still too shaken to respond. "I've seen it before," he continued, taking a slow step toward me. "People going to places they shouldn't, making deals they can't get out of. You were trying to find someone, weren't you?" My throat felt tight, but I managed to nod. "And now," he said, his eyes dark and unreadable, "you've taken their place." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The man gave me a sad, almost sympathetic smile. "The ones who disappear on the dark web, they never really come back. You've seen it, haven't you? The thing that looked like your brother? That wasn't him. Not anymore." I shook my head, trying to deny it, but deep down, I knew he was right. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't Jared. Jared was gone, taken by whatever darkness I'd stumbled into. And now it was coming for me. Before I could say anything else, the man turned and started walking away, his voice carrying on the cold night air. "Run while you still can, but you can't run forever." I watched him disappear into the shadows, his words echoing in my mind. I was free, but only for now. The dark web had taken Jared, and somehow I knew it wasn't finished with me yet. I ordered a cheap laptop from the dark web. It came preloaded with files of me. I'll start by saying that I'm not usually the type to mess around with the deep web. But when you're a broke college student, desperate times call for desperate measures. It was midterms, my old laptop had finally died, and I didn't have the money to just buy a new one. So, when I found a listing on a sketchy site advertising a cheap, used laptop price to sell, I figured, why not? The seller's profile was odd. It had no reviews, no profile picture, and the username was just a string of random letters and numbers. But the price was unbeatable. 100 for a laptop with decent specs, and the description claimed it was in working condition. So despite that little voice in my head telling me to stay far, far away, I went through with it. The laptop arrived faster than expected just a few days later. It wasn't anything special, just a black, slightly scuffed Dell model from maybe 5 or 6 years ago. There was no box, no charger, just the laptop wrapped in a layer of thick, cheap plastic. No big deal. I had a spare charger that would fit. I figured I could clean it up, reinstall the operating system, and it would do the trick. But as soon as I opened it, I knew something was off. The screen flashed to life, and instead of the usual setup screen, it went straight to a desktop. There were no login credentials or welcome messages. It was just ready. The desktop wallpaper was a solid black screen, and the only icon was a folder labeled Open Me. My first thought was that this was someone's attempt at a prank. I almost laughed, thinking that maybe some other college kid had been messing around with the laptop before selling it. But curiosity got the best of me, and I clicked on the folder. Inside, there were only 2 files: a text document called README and another folder labeled Personal Files. I opened the text document first. The note was short and direct. Welcome to your new laptop. We hope you find it familiar. Enjoy your purchase. Alright, creepy. But I was still assuming it was some kind of joke. I almost closed the document, but then that other folder, Personal Files, caught my eye. I opened it, and that's when I started feeling genuinely uncomfortable. The folder was full of images and videos, all neatly organized into subfolders labeled by date. It looked like someone had been keeping a detailed record of something. Each folder had a title, like bedroom or living room, along with timestamps that range back over the last couple of months. My heart started pounding as I opened the first folder titled Bedroom. Inside, there were dozens of images, each one showing the inside of a bedroom that looked disturbingly similar to mine. Same bedspread, same layout. But it was hard to tell for sure. The images were mostly dark, grainy, like they'd been taken with some low-quality camera at night. I clicked on a video, my pulse quickening. It loaded, showing a shaky view of my room in the middle of the night. The camera was angled towards my bed, and I could see myself sleeping, my face barely visible in the dim light from the street lamp outside. I stared at the screen, chills creeping up my spine. It was unmistakably my room, my bed, me. I closed the video, a knot forming in my stomach. There had to be a logical explanation, right? Maybe it was some kind of weird stock footage. But every time I tried to convince myself, that feeling of dread kept gnawing at me. I opened another file, this one labeled Living Room. And there it was again. My living room, dimly lit, the camera positioned somewhere low, like it had been set on a table or shelf. I could see my TV, my worn-out couch, even the empty coffee cup I'd left on the table the night before. That's when I started to panic. This wasn't just some random footage. It was live recordings, taken from inside my own home. And the dates on the folders went back months, long before I'd ever ordered the laptop. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. How could this be possible? I'd just received the laptop, but these videos, they showed parts of my life, things that only someone inside my apartment could have captured. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself down. Think, just think, Maybe it was some kind of elaborate prank. I forced myself to open the laptop again, my hands shaking. The black screen greeted me, that single ominous folder, still sitting on the desktop. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I had to. I needed answers, needed to understand what was going on. This time, I opened the most recent folder, one dated just 2 days before the laptop had arrived. It was labeled Kitchen. Inside were 2 video files, both with timestamps from around midnight. I clicked on the first one, feeling like I was about to walk into a horror movie. The screen flickered to life, showing my kitchen in eerie, night vision detail. I could make out the counter, the faint outline of the fridge, the chair I'd left pulled out from dinner. It looked so normal, which somehow made it worse. Then, something moved on the screen. I leaned closer, squinting. It was subtle, just a flicker. But there, right near the pantry door, something shifted in the shadows. I rewound the video and watched again, this time noticing a figure stepping into view, shrouded in darkness. They were barely visible, more of an outline than a person, but I could see them moving, slowly, like they were pacing. They stopped, turning toward the camera, almost like they knew they were being recorded. My throat tightened. I felt paralyzed, glued to the screen, even though every instinct was telling me to look away. The figure stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably just seconds. And then, in one swift movement, it leaned down, face coming closer to the camera. I could barely make out the contours, a pale face, dark eyes, but then the video cut out, leaving me staring at a black screen. I closed the file, trying to wrap my head around what I'd just seen. This was beyond creepy. It was impossible. How could someone have been in my kitchen without me noticing? I live alone. There's no one who could have recorded this. Right? The questions swirled in my mind, but I forced myself to keep going. There was still one more video from that night. Against every ounce of common sense, I clicked on it. The camera was still in the kitchen, angled slightly differently this time. I watched as the figure walked through the room, stopping just outside my bedroom door. They raised a hand, pressing it against the door, almost like they were listening. My heart pounded as the figure's head tilted slightly, as if they were considering something. And then, slowly, they pushed the door open, slipping into my bedroom. The video cut off there. I felt a wave of nausea. That had been my room, my space, my supposed sanctuary. And there was someone walking through it in the middle of the night, just a few feet from where I'd been sleeping. My mind raced. Could it have been someone breaking in? But that didn't make sense. Nothing had been stolen, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was like whoever, or whatever this was, they'd been there for a purpose beyond stealing, and they'd left me these videos to find. I sat there in the silence, my hands trembling, as I tried to make sense of it. The laptop was a message, a warning, maybe, or a threat, and whoever sent it had been watching me for months, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And then it hit me. If they'd been able to record me before, there was no reason to think they'd stopped. I spun around, scanning the room, looking for any sign of a camera or a microphone, but there was nothing, just the empty quiet of my apartment. But somehow, in that quiet, I knew I wasn't alone. It was like the walls themselves were breathing, pressing in on me, holding a presence that I couldn't see but could feel. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound felt amplified. Every creak in my apartment like a footstep just outside my door. I kept the laptop closed, but it didn't matter. I could feel its presence there, lurking like it was watching me, even when it was shut off. The next morning, I forced myself to think logically. Maybe this was some kind of hacking prank? People on the dark web did this kind of thing, right? I told myself that if I just wiped the laptop and erased everything, maybe I could get rid of it, whatever it was. So, I sat down at the table, opened the laptop, and went straight to the settings to do a full reset. I could feel my nerves steady a little as I clicked through the options, telling myself it would all be over soon. But just as I was about to hit reset, the screen flickered and the desktop flashed back up as if the laptop had overridden my command. The Open Me folder was still there, but now there was a second folder, one I hadn't seen before. It was labeled simply, Live. I froze, staring at the new folder, my mind racing. Live, like live stream. My gut told me not to open it, that whatever was in that folder would only make things worse, but my curiosity overpowered my caution. With a shaky hand, I clicked on the folder. Inside was a single video file labeled NOW. My heart pounded as I hovered over it, my finger trembling on the mouse. I clicked, and the video opened, filling the screen. The video showed my apartment, but this time it was in real time. I could see myself sitting at the table, staring at the screen in shock. The perspective was low, like the camera was hidden somewhere on the floor, angled up toward me. I looked around wildly, searching for a camera or phone, but I couldn't find anything. The video continued, showing me looking around, a mirror image of everything I was doing in real life, almost like the laptop was watching me. I waved my hand in front of my face, and the person on the screen did the same thing, an exact reflection. And then I saw it. In the corner of the video, just behind me, there was a figure standing in the hallway, barely visible in the shadow. My blood ran cold as I turned around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the screen, the figure was gone, as if it had never been there in the first place. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of the trance. I jumped, fumbling to pick it up, desperate for some connection to reality. But when I checked my messages, there was only one, from an unknown number. Do you see me? I stared at the message, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. My instinct was to throw the phone across the room, to shut the laptop and leave. But I felt trapped, like whatever this thing was. It wouldn't let me leave. It was closing in, watching from every angle. I heard a noise behind me, a soft creak, like a floorboard settling. Slowly I turned, peering down the hallway. My apartment was dead silent, but the atmosphere had shifted. It felt charged, heavy, like someone was standing just out of sight. I reached back, closing the laptop without breaking eye contact with the dark hallway, and took a shaky breath. I was done playing along, done pretending this was some kind of prank or tech glitch. Something was in my apartment, and I needed answers. So I sent a reply to the unknown number. What do you want? The response was instant. Look outside. I walked slowly toward my living room window, the air thick with a dread I couldn't shake. I pulled back the curtain, peering outside, half expecting to see someone standing on the sidewalk, watching me. But the street was empty. Just my reflection in the glass, pale and wide-eyed, staring back at me. And then I saw it. A faint, dark figure in the reflection, standing directly behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My heart hammered as I turned back to the window, but now, even the reflection was gone. My phone buzzed again. Don't look away. A shiver ran down my spine. I was done playing its game, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't respond, something worse would happen. So I typed back, "Who are you?" The reply came, and this time, it felt like the words had weight, like they carried a threat I couldn't ignore. I am everywhere, watching, waiting. I stumbled back, heart racing. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about the laptop. Whoever this was, whatever this was, it was in my apartment. It was in my life. And it wasn't going to stop. I tried calling the police, my fingers fumbling as I dialed. But the line was dead. Just a static hum. Desperate, I looked back at the laptop. My reflection stared back at me. But there was something wrong with it. My eyes in the reflection were darker, wider, like they were filled with shadows. I watched as my reflection's mouth slowly twisted into a grin, a cold, empty smile that wasn't mine. And then, without me moving, my reflection raised a hand, pointing directly at me. The screen went black. The silence that followed was deafening, like the entire apartment was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. I backed away, feeling the walls closing in, every shadow stretching toward me, like it was hungry, like it had been waiting for me all along. And in the darkness, I heard a voice, soft and clear, whispering from somewhere inside the room. You should have never opened the files. I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my keys and bolted out of the apartment, not bothering to lock the door behind me. The hallway felt narrow and suffocating. Every shadow stretched too long, too dark, as if something was lurking just beyond the edges of the light. I made it to my car and sped away. No real plan in mind, except to put as much distance as possible between me and that laptop. I ended up in a parking lot at an all-night diner on the edge of town. The place was nearly empty. A few trucks and a car or two scattered around, and the warm, yellow light inside felt safe somehow. I went in, ordered a coffee I knew I wouldn't drink, and took a seat by the window, trying to steady my nerves. I kept checking over my shoulder, waiting to see that shadowed figure in the corner of my vision, but the diner was quiet, normal. For a few minutes, I almost convinced myself that I'd left it all behind, that whatever had been following me was contained back there in my apartment, tied to the laptop. Maybe, I thought, maybe I'd be okay if I just stayed away from it. Then my phone buzzed. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, dread pooling in my stomach. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. It was another text from that same unknown number. You can't run. I glanced around the diner, half expecting to see someone staring at me, watching me, but everyone else was absorbed in their meals, unaware of the nightmare I was living. My phone buzzed again, another message. Look outside. My heart pounded. I didn't want to obey, didn't want to play along with whatever sick game this was, but I felt compelled, like a puppet on a string. I turned slowly toward the window, peering out into the dark parking lot. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the empty lot, the dim streetlights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. But then, at the far end of the lot, standing just outside the circle of light, I saw a figure. It was barely more than an outline, dark and still, but I knew it was watching me. My eyes strained, trying to make out any details, but it was like looking into a void, a space where nothing should exist. The longer I stared, the colder I felt, like it was somehow drawing the warmth out of me, piece by piece. My phone buzzed again. Come closer. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. There was no way I was going out there. No way I was getting anywhere near that thing. But as I sat there, frozen, I saw the figure take a step forward, inching closer, as if it could sense my hesitation. I backed away from the window, nearly stumbling over my chair, and ran to the bathroom. I locked the door behind me, breathing hard, my back pressed against the cold tile wall. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, flickering faintly, casting harsh shadows that felt too solid. like they were about to reach out and touch me. My phone buzzed again, the sound loud and invasive in the cramped bathroom. I pulled it out, dread settling deep in my gut. "You can't hide," I swallowed, trying to keep my hands steady. I typed back, "What do you want from me?" It felt futile, like talking to the air, but I needed answers, something that could help me make sense of this nightmare. The reply came instantly. "You opened the door. Now it's my turn." I felt a wave of nausea. The words made no sense, but I could feel their weight, the meaning behind them pressing down on me. I'd let something in, something that didn't belong in this world. And now, it was closing in, like it was feeding off my fear. The bathroom lights flickered again, brighter this time, casting my shadow long across the wall. But as I watched, my shadow didn't quite match my movements. I raised my arm, and there was a split-second delay, like my shadow was struggling to keep up. And then, slowly, my shadow's arm lowered on its own. I backed up against the sink, my heart hammering, watching as my shadow continued to move, reaching out toward me, stretching across the wall like it was trying to escape. I stumbled forward, reaching for the door, but as soon as I touched the handle, the light went out, plunging the bathroom into complete darkness. I held my breath, listening to the silence, and then, just inches from my ear, I heard it, a whisper, low and raspy. "It's too late." I fumbled for the door, throwing it open and stumbling out into the diner. A few people looked up, giving me strange looks, but I barely noticed. I grabbed my things and ran out to my car, not even bothering to look back. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was sitting in the back seat, watching me in the rearview mirror. I glanced back, but there was nothing, just empty seats and dark windows. But I knew it was there, somewhere, just out of sight. It was watching, waiting. I thought about going to the police, telling them about the laptop, the messages, the shadowed figure. But what would I say? How could I explain something like this? They'd think I was crazy. And honestly, maybe I was. But deep down, I knew that no one could help me. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't something you could run from. It was a part of me now, stitched into my life, my reality, like it had found a way to slip through the cracks. And now, it was only a matter of time before it decided to make itself at home. After that night, nothing felt real anymore. I didn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't. The thought of being alone in that place, with the laptop and whatever had come with it, was unbearable. Instead, I drove around aimlessly, stopping only for gas and coffee, hoping that staying on the move might keep it away. But even on the road, I felt its presence, like a cold shadow hanging just out of sight, waiting. By the third day, exhaustion was taking over. I found a cheap motel off the highway, paid in cash, and collapsed onto the bed, barely able to keep my eyes open. But sleep didn't bring relief. The nightmares came instead. Visions of dark, twisting shadows and a figure with hollow eyes standing over me, reaching out, waiting. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The room was pitch black, the cheap curtains blocking out any trace of light. I reached for my phone, hoping for some kind of comfort, but when I pressed the button, the screen stayed black. The battery was drained, even though I'd charged it before lying down. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone gently knocking on the motel room door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. No one knew I was here. I'd been careful, paying with cash, avoiding calls. But the tapping continued, soft and relentless. I crept to the door, holding my breath, and pressed my ear against it. The tapping stopped, and then, from the other side, I heard that same low, raspy whisper that had haunted me for days. You can't hide. My blood ran cold. I backed away, eyes wide, stumbling over the chair in the corner of the room. The air felt thick, suffocating, like the walls were pressing in. I looked around, desperate for any kind of escape, but the room felt small, claustrophobic. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to run. And then I saw it, my reflection in the cracked motel mirror across the room. At first it looked normal, just me, wide-eyed and terrified. But as I stared, it changed. My reflection's face twisted, darkening, as a slow, cold smile spread across its lips, a look I knew I wasn't making. My reflection raised a hand, waving slowly, fingers stretching impossibly long, like shadowy tendrils curling against the glass. My mouth went dry as my reflection began to mouth words, slow and deliberate, each syllable like a punch to the gut. Come, with me. I backed up, but the reflection didn't. It leaned closer to the glass, the eyes dark and empty, still smiling that twisted smile. I turned to the door, adrenaline kicking in, and bolted, not stopping to grab my things. I ran down the motel hallway, out into the parking lot, the night air cold and biting against my skin. But I didn't care. I just kept running, trying to put as much distance between myself and that motel as possible. When I finally stopped, breathless and shaking, I found myself in the middle of a deserted parking lot. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, stretching out across the ground in every direction. I looked around, catching my breath, but that sense of dread only grew. And then, slowly, I noticed the shadow on the pavement in front of me, a dark, twisted shape that didn't match my own. It was standing there, watching, shifting closer with every flicker of the streetlight. I stepped back, but the shadow followed, mirroring my movements, closing in with every step I took. I could feel it now, a chill that seeped into my bones, an emptiness that threatened to swallow me whole. In a panic, I pulled out my phone, frantically pressing the power button, hoping for a glimmer of light, some way to break the darkness. But the screen remained black, dead, as if whatever was inside it had finally broken free. The shadow loomed closer, stretching out across the pavement, the edges fraying like smoke, curling around my feet. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body felt frozen, paralyzed by the cold grip of fear. And then, in a voice so soft it was barely a whisper, I heard it speak. I'm here now. My heart pounded as the shadow crept up my legs, the darkness seeping into my skin, sinking deeper, like it was merging with me. I felt myself slipping, my vision blurring, as the shadow filled every corner of my mind, twisting my thoughts, taking over. The last thing I remember is the sensation of something cold and hollow settling inside me, a presence that wasn't mine, watching through my eyes, wearing my skin. I woke up in my apartment, the morning light streaming through the windows. For a moment, everything felt normal, like I'd just had a terrible dream. But as I sat up, the laptop was there, open on the table, the screen flickering to life. The Open Me folder was gone. In its place was a new folder labeled, Welcome Back. A chill ran through me as I clicked on it, hands trembling. Inside were more images, more videos of me sitting at the laptop, staring blankly at the screen with a cold, empty smile. Each image was dated, each video time-stamped, recording every moment of the night I'd spent running, every place I thought I'd escaped to, and then I saw it. One last video file labeled Today. I opened it, watching as the camera showed me, sitting right where I was now, staring at the laptop. But this time, the me on the screen turned, looking directly at the camera. eyes dark and hollow, that same twisted smile spreading across my face. The video ended, and for a moment, the screen went black. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass, my own face looking back at me, empty and unfamiliar. And as I watched, my reflection smiled. I bought a ghost hunting service from the dark web. The ghost they found is me. I've always been curious about the strange, the supernatural, but it wasn't until a few weeks ago that I took it seriously. It all started as a joke, a bored night, scrolling through shady corners of the internet, the kind you really shouldn't mess with. But when you spend enough time online, you find yourself looking for more intense experiences, you know? Things that push the boundaries of what you believe. That's when I stumbled upon something I didn't expect. A ghost hunting service on the dark web. It was ridiculous, really. The listing had no reviews, no contact info, just a single line in broken English. We find ghosts that others cannot. Normally, I would have laughed it off, but something about it grabbed my attention. Maybe it was the boredom, or maybe it was because strange things had been happening in my apartment lately. The kind of things that I could brush off as bad luck. Keys disappearing, cold spots in random parts of my place, or lights flickering. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just coincidence. Something felt off. Still, I didn't actually believe in ghosts. Not really. But on that particular night, I was restless. My place felt colder than usual, even though it was a warm evening. So, against my better judgment, I clicked on the listing and followed the instructions. It was simple. Enter your address, a brief description of the disturbances, and pay a small fee through some crypto service. No names, no details, just payment and an ominous message. We will arrive soon. Do not disturb us. I didn't think much of it after that. Maybe I thought it was a scam, a way to mess with people stupid enough to spend money on ghost hunters from the dark web. But later that night, when I was half asleep on my couch, I heard a knock at the door. I froze. It was past midnight. No one knocked at that time. My heart raced as I slowly made my way to the door, peeking through the peephole. There was nothing. No one standing there. The hallway outside was dead quiet. I shook my head, thinking I imagined it, but as I stepped back, the knock came again. Louder this time, more insistent. I opened the door, my pulse pounding in my ears, and there they were. Two people dressed in black stood in the hallway. Their faces were obscured by dark hoods, and they didn't say a word. The taller one handed me a piece of paper, folded neatly. The other one simply stared at me, their eyes hidden beneath the hood's shadow. I stared at them, frozen. I don't know why, but I didn't ask them anything. Something about their presence made it impossible to speak, like the words were stuck in my throat. Without a word, they pushed past me, stepping into my apartment. I should have stopped them. I should have told them to get out, but instead, I watched as they moved silently, each step careful, deliberate. One of them took out what looked like an old, weathered notebook, scribbling something down as they wandered around. The other began unpacking equipment from a small black bag, stuff that looked more like ancient tools than modern ghost hunting gadgets. I stood there awkwardly, the paper still clutched in my hand. Finally, I unfolded it, and the message was as unsettling as everything else. Do not interfere. Do not leave. You are part of the process. My blood ran cold. What the hell had I gotten myself into? They began to work silently, as if I wasn't even there. The taller one set up small candles in every corner of the room, while the other scribbled notes furiously. eyes darting to the shadows in the room like they were seeing things I couldn't. There was no explanation, no questions asked. They just moved, methodically, as though they had done this 1,000 times. I wanted to ask them what they were doing, why they were here, but that paper kept me quiet. I had a feeling they wouldn't answer, even if I tried. So I just sat on my couch, watching them work. It was eerie, like watching something play out in a dream. But then, something shifted. The air in the room grew heavier, colder. The candles they'd set up flickered violently, the flames dancing like they were being blown by an unseen wind. The taller one paused, glancing toward me, for the first time since they'd arrived. And that's when I noticed it, the way their eyes focused, not on me, but through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Their eyes didn't meet mine like a normal person's would. It was as if they were looking past me, into some space that I couldn't see or feel. The shorter one began whispering, their voice too low for me to catch. The taller one responded with a curt nod, then pulled out a small, handheld device. It looked old, almost like a relic from another time, covered in strange symbols I couldn't understand. They waved it through the air, and suddenly the room seemed to shift. The floor beneath me felt unstable, like I was standing on something that could give way at any second. The walls creaked as though they were being stretched by something invisible. The whole apartment felt wrong, like it was being distorted, twisted by forces I couldn't comprehend. That's when they spoke for the first time. "You're here," the taller one said, their voice flat and emotionless. The shorter one nodded, scribbling more notes. "Yes, we found you." I didn't understand what they meant. Found who? There wasn't anyone else in the apartment except for me. But their words echoed in my mind, heavy with an implication that sent a chill through my bones. And then it hit me, hard. I wasn't just a bystander in their process. I was the ghost they had come to find. At first, I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was all part of some elaborate prank. But the look in their eyes, the way they avoided actually seeing me, told me that this wasn't a joke. Whatever they were hunting, they thought it was me. I wanted to ask them to leave, to tell them that this was all a mistake. But something stopped me. The weight of the room, the way the air pressed down on my chest, made it impossible to move, to speak. I sat there, paralyzed, as they continued their ritual, searching for something that I couldn't understand, searching for me. I stayed rooted to the spot, trying to make sense of the scene unfolding in front of me. The two strangers moved around my apartment like they knew it better than I did, inspecting every corner, every shadow, as if they were searching for something just out of reach. I wanted to speak up, tell them to stop, but the words wouldn't come. It felt like my throat was constricting the longer they stayed. The taller one approached the mirror in my hallway, pausing as if something had caught their eye. They stared at it, the reflection of the dimly lit room staring back at them. I stood up from the couch, hoping to get a better look at what they were seeing. My own reflection moved in sync with me, like any normal mirror would, but there was something about the way the stranger looked at it, like they were waiting for something to happen. Then, the shorter one spoke in a low voice, breaking the silence. "It's near." The taller one nodded, not taking their eyes off the mirror. I stepped closer, drawn in by their focus, and for a second, I saw something strange in the reflection. It wasn't much, just a flicker, like a shadow moving across the room, but it was enough to send a chill through me. I blinked, and whatever it was disappeared. "You're seeing this too, right?" I asked, finally finding my voice. Neither of them responded. The air in the apartment was getting colder by the second. and I could feel the goosebumps rising on my arms. There was no draft, no reason for the sudden chill. It was as if the room itself had shifted again, as though I was no longer in control of what happened here. The taller one finally spoke, their voice so quiet it barely registered. "It's attached to you." My stomach twisted. "What is?" They didn't answer, but the shorter one began murmuring something in a language I didn't understand. The words were harsh, guttural, and they filled the room like a thick fog, settling into every corner. I felt a sudden weight on my chest, pressing down harder and harder. I staggered back, struggling to breathe, my vision blurring. I glanced toward the mirror, expecting to see myself looking back, but something was wrong. My reflection wasn't moving. It stood there, frozen in place, staring back at me with an expression I didn't recognize. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step back. My reflection didn't follow. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice shaky. I was fighting the urge to run, to get as far away from these people and from my own reflection as possible. But I couldn't leave. That note had said not to leave. I was part of whatever this was. The shorter one stopped chanting and looked directly at me for the first time since they arrived. "Do you know when you died?" they asked, as if it were the most casual question in the world. I stared at them, my mind reeling. "What are you talking about? I'm not dead." They didn't argue, didn't even flinch at my answer. The taller one scribbled something into their notebook before turning to face me. "Sometimes it takes a while for the soul to realize," they said, their tone devoid of any emotion. "You've been living in the in-between, not alive, but not quite gone." I felt like the floor was going to drop out from under me. "That's insane. I'm right here, talking to you." The taller one nodded, almost sympathetically. "You're here, yes, but not in the way you think." I wanted to argue, to tell them they were crazy, but as I looked around the room, things began to feel off. The flickering lights, the strange cold spots, the disappearing keys. I had blamed it all on stress, or maybe just the quirks of living in an old apartment. But now I wasn't so sure. I moved closer to the mirror, my reflection still standing motionless, staring back at me with wide, unblinking eyes. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out, but I needed to know. I raised my hand slowly, hesitantly, and watched as my reflection did nothing. It just stood there, like a mannequin, hollow and lifeless. I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. No, this isn't real." The taller one stepped forward, placing the strange device on the floor. It hummed softly, emitting a low vibration that made my skin crawl. "It is real," they said. "You've been trapped here, living in the echo of your life. That's why you called us. You felt it, didn't you? The cold, the strange occurrences. You knew something was wrong." I wanted to scream, to tell them to leave, to get out of my apartment and take this nightmare with them. But the truth was, I had felt it. For weeks, maybe months, I had known something wasn't right. I had brushed it off, pretended it was just my imagination. But now, "Can you fix it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The shorter one was already packing up their equipment, as though the job was done. They didn't answer me. They didn't need to. The taller one gave me a long, hard look before finally speaking. "We don't fix, we only find." With that, they turned and left, closing the door behind them without another word. I stood there alone in the eerie silence of my apartment, the weight of their words settling over me like a heavy fog. I looked back at the mirror one last time, but my reflection was gone. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. When they left, the apartment fell into a suffocating stillness. It was as if the air itself had frozen in place, waiting. My reflection was gone, and yet I still felt its presence, lingering in the room like a ghostly residue. I stood there, staring at the empty mirror, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. There was no way. But everything around me felt too real to deny. The silence had weight, pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. The shadows seemed thicker, darker, as if they were alive, watching, waiting for me to make a move. I should have felt relieved that those strangers were gone, but instead, I felt more trapped than ever. I sank into the couch, staring blankly at the now extinguished candles they had left behind. The apartment was colder than before, the kind of cold that creeps into your bones and makes your skin crawl. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, but it did nothing to shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. I didn't know how long I sat there, my mind spinning in circles, trying to make sense of everything. The idea that I was dead, actually dead, seemed absurd, impossible. But the more I thought about it, the more it made a sick kind of sense. The missing keys, the flickering lights, the cold spots, and the fact that, for months now, I hadn't felt alive. Not really. It was like I had been moving through life in a fog, disconnected from everything and everyone. I had brushed it off as burnout, depression, maybe just stress from work. But now, I looked down at my hands. They looked normal, solid, real. I could feel the rough texture of the blanket beneath my fingers. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But if I was dead, why did everything feel so normal? Or maybe that was the point. Maybe death wasn't the sudden, dramatic thing people thought it was. Maybe it was slow, creeping up on you until you were stuck in the middle, not alive, but not fully gone either. I stood up, needing to move, needing to prove to myself that I was still here. My legs felt shaky as I walked around the apartment, touching everything. The walls, the furniture, the floor. It all felt real, solid. But when I reached the window and looked out, the street below seemed off. The cars moved, the people walked by, but it all felt distant, like I was watching a scene play out on a screen. The sounds were muted, the colors faded. It was like the world outside was slipping away from me, bit by bit. I turned away from the window, my heart racing. My apartment had never felt so claustrophobic. I needed to get out, to breathe, to shake off whatever nightmare I had fallen into. Grabbing my jacket, I rushed to the door and yanked it open. But the hallway outside wasn't right. It was the same hallway I had walked through 1,000 times, but now it felt wrong. The lights flickered, casting long, unnatural shadows that stretched across the floor. The walls seemed too narrow, the air too thick. And there was that cold again, creeping up my spine, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I hesitated, the weight of the doorway suddenly feeling like a boundary I shouldn't cross. But I forced myself to step out, my feet moving forward, even as my instincts screamed at me to stay inside. The door clicked shut behind me, with a finality that made my chest tighten. The hallway was empty, but it didn't feel empty. I could hear faint noises, soft whispers, like distant conversations just out of earshot. The kind of voices you'd hear in a dream, not quite making sense, but still there, still real. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud as I made my way towards the elevator, the sound bouncing off the walls in strange ways. As I passed the mirror in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of myself, or at least I thought I did. But when I turned to look directly at it, my reflection wasn't there, just the empty hallway staring back at me. Panic surged through me. I needed to get out of this building. Maybe the fresh air would clear my head. bring me back to reality. But when I pressed the elevator button, nothing happened. No lights, no sounds. The button didn't even light up. It was as if the elevator had never existed in the first place. I turned to the stairwell, my last option. My footsteps quickened, the feeling of being watched growing with every step I took. The stairs felt wrong too, steeper than they should have been, the steps echoing endlessly in the silence. It was like I was descending into something much deeper than the lobby. When I finally reached the bottom, I pushed open the door to the street, relief flooding through me as the cool night air hit my face. But as I stepped outside, I realized that nothing had changed. The street, the cars, the people, all of it still felt distant, unreal. I walked down the sidewalk, passing people who didn't seem to notice me at all. I tried to speak, to get someone's attention, but no one even glanced in my direction. It was like I didn't exist. I stopped in front of a small convenience store, looking at my reflection in the window. This time, I saw myself, but something was off. My face was pale, too pale. My eyes were hollow, dark circles beneath them. And then, as I stared at my reflection, it slowly smiled. I stumbled back, my heart racing. That wasn't me. That smile, that wasn't me. I turned and ran, my mind spinning, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stay in one place. Not after what I had just seen. The city felt like a maze. Streets, blending into each other, twisting and turning until I didn't know where I was anymore. Finally, I found myself back at my apartment building, standing in front of the door, my hands shaking. I didn't want to go back inside, but I didn't know where else to go. There was nowhere to run. I opened the door and stepped inside, the familiar cold air wrapping around me like a blanket. The hallway was empty, silent, but as I approached my apartment, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The door was already open, and from inside, I heard the whispers. The whispers pulled me back into the apartment, even though every part of me screamed to run. The door, slightly ajar, swayed as though someone had just stepped through. The familiar cold seeped out, and with it, that same eerie weight I'd felt before. I stood there staring at the gap, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the fear of stepping inside that stopped me. It was the fact that I knew something was waiting. Still, I pushed the door open. The moment I stepped inside, the whispers stopped. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it, but everything felt different. The silence was thick, pressing in on me like the walls were closing in, like I was intruding in my own home. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but no. The room was empty. Yet it wasn't. I could feel it. Something was in the room, something I couldn't see but was watching me. The air was heavier, thicker. Every step I took felt like walking through water, slow and deliberate. I made my way toward the living room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when I saw it, the mirror in the hallway. It was wrong. The glass was warped, as if the surface had been twisted by some unseen force. My reflection was there, but it didn't match my movements. I was standing still, yet the reflection tilted its head, just a fraction. I took a step closer, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch the glass. The reflection didn't move. It stood there, staring back at me with eyes that weren't mine. The face looked like me, but the expression, it was hollow, cold, like it was waiting for something. I yanked my hand back, the cold sweat running down my spine. I turned away from the mirror, trying to shake off the creeping dread, but I couldn't. Something wasn't right. I felt like I was being watched, closely, intimately, the kind of attention that gets under your skin, like someone's breath on the back of your neck. I glanced toward the far corner of the room where the shadows gathered. The darkness there felt wrong, too deep for the dim light in the room. I couldn't see anything in it, but I felt it, a presence. It was subtle at first, a soft shift in the air, but then it grew. It was watching me from the darkness, waiting for me to notice it. I took a step back, my body on autopilot, my mind screaming to get out, but my legs wouldn't move fast enough. I couldn't tear my eyes away from that corner, even as the shadows seemed to pulse, like they were breathing. Something shifted inside them. Something moved. And then it stepped forward. I couldn't see it fully, not at first. It was more like a silhouette, a figure that didn't quite belong in this world. The outline was human, but the way it moved was wrong. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long, bending in ways that made my stomach churn. I blinked, and for a second, it wasn't there. But when I opened my eyes again, it had taken another step, closer now. I tried to speak, to demand what it was, but my throat closed up. My voice wouldn't come. All I could do was stand there, frozen in place, as the figure reached out with one long, shadowy arm. And that's when I heard it again, the whisper, soft and clear. But this time, it was inside my head. "We found you." The words slithered into my mind, cold and invasive, and suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just a ghost, or a spirit, or whatever I had imagined when I stupidly ordered that service. This was something else entirely. It wasn't hunting me. It had already found me. It had been with me the whole time, watching, waiting for the moment I'd realize the truth. I backed away, desperate to get away from the figure, but as I moved, the room seemed to stretch. The walls grew taller. The floor beneath me felt unstable, like I was walking on uneven ground. I turned, hoping to make a run for the door, but the door was gone. In its place was just more hallway, twisting and stretching like an endless labyrinth. "No," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. "This can't be happening." But it was. The figure was closer now, its outline clearer. It didn't have a face, just a blank, empty void where its features should be. And yet, I could feel it staring at me, its attention fixed on me, waiting for something. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that circled around me, wrapping me in their cold embrace. I stumbled backward, crashing into the coffee table behind me. My hands scrambled for something, anything, to defend myself with, but there was nothing. The room was a blur of shadows and distorted shapes, all of it warping under the weight of whatever presence had taken hold of my home. I don't know how, but I managed to push myself off the ground and run. I bolted for the hallway, my legs weak beneath me, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. The hallway stretched out in front of me, impossibly long, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. "You're not alive. You never were." I ran faster, but the floor seemed to shift beneath me. My apartment had become a maze, the walls stretching and warping, the doorways leading to nowhere. Every corner I turned led me deeper into the same hallways, the same suffocating shadows. And all the while, I could feel that presence getting closer. Finally, I reached a door at the end of the hall, my bedroom. I didn't think, didn't pause. I just threw it open and slammed it shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. The room was dark, but at least it felt quieter. The whispers had stopped, the air slightly less heavy. I backed away from the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment, I thought I might be safe, but then, from the corner of the room, I heard the soft creak of a floorboard. I wasn't alone. Something moved in the darkness, shifting just beyond the reach of the faint light seeping in from the window. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see what was there, but my body betrayed me. Slowly, I turned my head toward the corner, and there it was, standing perfectly still, watching me. It wasn't a ghost, it was me. The figure stood in the corner, shrouded in darkness, but I could make out enough. The shape of its body, the angle of its face. It was me, exactly as I looked in the mirror earlier, pale, hollow, and wrong. My knees went weak, and I stumbled backward, my back hitting the door with a loud thud. The impact rattled my bones, but I barely noticed. My mind was reeling, trying to process the impossible. How could it be me? The figure didn't move at first. It just stared with that same empty, lifeless expression I had seen earlier. My hands fumbled for the doorknob, trying to twist it open, but it wouldn't budge. Locked, trapped, and that thing, I, was still standing there, watching. The air in the room grew thick, heavier than before, pressing down on me from all sides. It was hard to breathe, like the oxygen had been sucked out. My chest felt tight, my heart racing out of control. My reflection, if that's what it was, tilted its head slowly, the motion smooth, deliberate, and then it smiled. That same twisted, unnatural smile I had seen in the window earlier. Who are you? I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. I wasn't expecting an answer. Maybe I didn't want one. It stepped forward, the movement unnaturally slow and fluid, like it was gliding over the floor. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. My body pressed harder against the door, the wood digging into my back as if it could absorb me. My hands trembled as I tried the lock again, but the knob wouldn't turn. The figure took another step, coming into the faint light filtering through the curtains. It was clearer now. My face, my body, but not me. There was a hollowness in its eyes, something dark and empty, like it wasn't human, like it was a shell. I was shaking, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Why are you doing this? Its smile widened, stretching unnaturally across its face. And then, in a voice that wasn't quite mine, it whispered, "You called us." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had called them. I had gone looking for this, the service from the dark web, the ghost hunters. But this wasn't what I had expected. None of this was supposed to happen. I didn't know, I said, my voice breaking. I didn't know. The thing that wore my face kept smiling, its head tilting even further, its neck bending at an unnatural angle. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead. My brain was screaming at me to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I was trapped in place, staring at myself, or whatever this thing was, as it took another step closer. "You are the ghost," it whispered, its voice a distorted echo of mine. "You're not supposed to be here." The words sank in slowly, like poison spreading through my veins. The coldness in the apartment, the strange occurrences, my missing reflection. They had all been warning signs, but I had ignored them, brushed them off. And now I was paying the price. The figure was inches from me now, close enough that I could feel the unnatural chill radiating off its skin. It leaned in, its breath cold and stale against my face. "You've been dead for a long time," it whispered. No, that's not possible," I stammered, my hands gripping the door behind me in a futile attempt to ground myself in reality. But reality was slipping away. The figure raised a hand, its fingers long and thin, and gently placed them on my chest. The touch sent a shock wave of cold through my body, like ice spreading through my veins. My heart pounded against my ribs, desperate, frantic, as if it knew something I didn't. "Do you remember now?" it whispered, its voice soft and mocking. "Do you remember how you died?" My mind raced, but I couldn't find the memory. Everything was a blur, a fog of disconnected thoughts and images. I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. "I'm not dead," I whispered, clinging to the only thing I had left, denial. The figure smiled again, and this time it leaned in close, its lips brushing against my ear as it spoke. "You were never supposed to leave. You've been here all along, trapped between worlds, clinging to a life that's long gone." I gasped, the truth finally sinking in like a knife to the chest. My mind reeled as memories I hadn't even realized I had suppressed came flooding back. The accident, the crash, the darkness. I had never walked away. I had never left. And now I was stuck, caught in some twisted in-between, where the living and the dead blurred together. The ghost hunters, they hadn't been called to hunt some spirit in my apartment. They had been called to find me. The thing that looked like me smiled one last time, its hollow eyes staring deep into mine. "You can't stay here anymore. It's time for you to go." The room began to blur, the walls stretching and warping as the figure stepped back, fading into the darkness. My vision swam, and the coldness in the air intensified, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could feel the pull, the weight of the other side tugging at me, drawing me closer. I tried to fight it, tried to cling to the last shreds of my reality, but it was too late. The truth was undeniable. I was the ghost. I had always been the ghost, and now I was being pulled back to where I belonged.